The chamber of the Galacti Consuil had never been so quiet. Normally, the air hummed with low murmurs, the rustle of robes and the steady pulse of 1,000 hollow displays projecting trade routes and peace treaties across the ceiling. But today, the only sound was the faint hum of the containment field that sealed the room. The gathered delegates, representatives of dozens of species from across the spiral arms, sat frozen, their gazes fixed on the holographic image flickering in the center of the chamber. A fleet. Not just any fleet, an unknown one. Ships of unfamiliar design, cold and angular, drifting in perfect formation just beyond the edge of the Thalmar expanse. Their hulls bore no known insignia, no beacon codes, no registration in the galactic database. They were silent. Dark. Waiting. At first, some assumed it was another border skirmish, a pirate armada or a rogue faction trying to make a statement. But then, the signal came. A single transmission, brief and clear, in an ancient and mostly forgotten dialect. One word, decoded after hours of analysis. Human. That was when the chamber fell silent. It had been nearly 5 centuries since the word human had last been spoken in any official record. The species was considered extinct, wiped out during the collapse, when the old Sol system burned in its final wars. No survivors, no colonies, nothing left but rumors and scattered debris drifting through forgotten sectors. Humanity had become a ghost story, a warning told to young cadets about what happens when a species grows too proud, too fast. And yet, here they were. The Consuil's high speaker, a tall, crystalline being whose voice resonated through harmonic frequencies, finally broke the silence. "Are we certain of the translation?" it asked, though everyone in the room already knew the answer. "We've verified it through 6 independent systems," replied the Velithian intelligence officer, his scaled face pale under the lights. "There's no doubt. The transmission originates from that fleet. The syntax, structure, even the tonal emphasis, it's Terran." The word hung in the air like a ghost. Terran. For centuries, no one had dared to believe they might return. And if they had survived, what had become of them? The Consuil had seen countless empires rise and fall, but humans were something different. They were unpredictable, emotional, driven by a kind of defiance that even the most advanced species couldn't quite understand. They fought against the odds, against logic itself, and somehow, more often than not, they won. That was what had made them both admired and feared. "Do we know their numbers?" another delegate asked quietly. "Estimates suggest between 200 and 300 ships," the officer replied. "But their readings are strange. Our sensors can't fully penetrate their shields. It's like they're using technology we can't classify." The crystalline high speaker shifted, light rippling through its body. "Impossible! Humanity never reached beyond early fusion and kinetic weaponry before the collapse. They were centuries behind modern propulsion. How could they possess such—" "They shouldn't," the officer interrupted softly. "But they do." Across the chamber, a low murmur spread. Some delegates whispered about ancient prophecies, others about revenge. The Malari representative, whose species had once warred with humans during the old Earth expansion, slammed his claws against the table. "We should strike first," he growled, "before they bring their madness here again. You know what they did before? They burn everything they touch." But before the chamber could erupt, a calm voice cut through the noise. "Or perhaps they've come back for something else." The voice belonged to an elder historian, one of the few who still studied the extinct species. Her eyes shimmered with curiosity rather than fear. "Think about it," she continued. "They've been silent for centuries. If they truly rebuilt themselves from extinction, then this is no invasion. It's a statement. A message." The high speaker tilted its crystalline head. "And what message would that be?" The historian leaned forward. That they survived. And they remember. The words hit like a tremor. Every being in the room felt the weight of it. Humanity, long thought gone, had endured. And they had not forgotten the galaxy that once turned its back on them. Outside the Consuil chamber, the fleet remained motionless. Dozens of long, spear-like ships hung in the void, silent and disciplined, as if waiting for permission to move. But anyone who had ever studied humans knew one thing: they never waited for permission. The first transmission to the fleet was sent hours later. The Consuil tried diplomacy, hailing them in over 50 languages, offering peace, curiosity, even friendship. For a while, there was nothing, only static. Then a faint voice came through the void, distorted but unmistakably human. "This sector was once ours," the voice said. "We're just coming home." The chamber descended into chaos. Some demanded immediate mobilization of defense fleets. Others pleaded for caution. But deep inside, many of them felt something colder than fear: shame. Because they remembered the final days of old Earth, when the galaxy had stood by and watched humanity fall, unwilling to intervene. And now, it seemed, the ghosts of Sul had come to collect the debt. On the outer rim, small patrols reported strange readings, ships moving faster than any known drive should allow. Whole sensor arrays flickered and died, as if overwhelmed by power signatures too strong to comprehend. In one report, a scout described seeing the human ships unfold, literally unfold, from smaller structures, as if the vessels were alive. Then the signal went dead. The Consuil scrambled for answers. Strategic councils convened, fleets were repositioned, and the media across the galaxy exploded with speculation. Every channel spoke the same word in a dozen tongues: humans. But while the politicians argued and the generals prepared, one small vessel approached the human fleet under diplomatic flag. Inside, it was a single envoy, young, nervous, but brave enough to face what others feared. As the shuttle drew closer, the sensors struggled to read the human ships. Their designs were alien, yet distinctly familiar. Cold metallic surfaces mixed with sharp geometry, beautiful, efficient, and intimidating. Then, for the first time, the humans responded with visuals. The image that filled the envoy's screen made his breath catch. A human figure appeared, standing in what looked like a command deck. The man's eyes were cold, steady, his uniform simple but immaculate. Behind him, through the glass panels, dozens of massive ships floated silently, their hulls marked with a single emblem: a broken planet wrapped in a rising sun. "Galacti Consuil," the man said, his tone even, controlled. "We are not your enemies, but we remember how you left us to die." The envoy tried to speak, but the transmission ended abruptly. Back in the Consuil chamber, no one could agree what to do. Some saw a chance to make peace and learn what humanity had become. Others saw only a threat, a species that once defied the galaxy and was now back with power beyond comprehension. And out there, in the darkness between the stars, the human fleet began to move. Slowly, deliberately, their engines ignited with light that shimmered like liquid gold. The Consuil's defense grid activated, alarms echoing through every capital world. The high speaker watched from the observation deck, its crystalline form trembling as the first human formation shifted into attack alignment. No one knew what they wanted, no one knew how they'd survived, but everyone, every species, every world, felt the same chill run through their veins. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The movement of the human fleet sent ripples of unease across the galaxy. Worlds that had never even heard of Earth suddenly found themselves talking about it, about the lost species that had somehow risen from extinction. Entire news cycles were consumed by speculation. Were they seeking vengeance, refuge, or something even more dangerous, something the galaxy couldn't yet understand? In the Consuil chamber, panic and politics mixed like fuel and fire. Each representative tried to predict the next move. The Malari demanded immediate strikes to neutralize the threat. The Velithians argued for diplomacy, fearing a war they couldn't win. The crystalline high speaker maintained a fragile calm, though deep inside, even it could feel the tremor of dread humming through the chamber's floor. Reports poured in from observation posts along the border. The human fleet didn't fire. They didn't invade. They simply advanced, slowly, methodically, one sector at a time. Wherever they passed, communication satellites flickered, local systems went dark, and fleets vanished from sensors. No wreckage, no distress calls, just silence. A silence more terrifying than any explosion. On the fourth day, a new transmission appeared. It wasn't directed to the Consuil this time. It was broadcast openly, across every frequency, to every world, every race, every station. "This is Admiral Rains of the Terran Union Fleet," the voice said. "We come seeking truth. Those who remember what was done to Earth will understand. Those who do not will soon learn." The words were calm, measured. But there was something behind them, a weight, a quiet grief that felt older than the stars. On Vallis Prime, a young communications analyst named Terran watched the broadcast from his station. He wasn't old enough to remember the collapse, but he'd studied what little history remained. Most of it was fragments, corrupted records, faded images, and censored accounts of how humanity had torn itself apart while the galaxy watched from afar. But hearing that voice now, it didn't sound like a species seeking revenge. It sounded like survivors carrying a wound that had never healed. Still, the fear was real. The Consuil dispatched its most advanced fleets to the border, led by ships with weapons capable of cracking moons. But even as they positioned themselves, sensor readings showed the same impossible data. Human ships bending space in ways that defied known physics. No one could explain it. Some whispered that humans had found a new power source, something beyond fusion or antimatter. Others claimed they'd made contact with something out there, something older than the Consuil itself. Terran couldn't stop thinking about it. Humanity had disappeared centuries ago, but somehow they'd rebuilt everything. Alone, in the void. No allies, no trade routes, no aid. And now they returned with technology that dwarfed the greatest empires. What could possibly have driven them to such lengths? He spent nights scrolling through ancient records, piecing together fragments of history. In the last known archives of the Sol system, there was mention of a final message sent before the collapse. It was never decoded, just labeled Terran Transmission 0. And now, looking at the pattern of Admiral Rains's words, Terran began to notice similarities. The same cadence, the same phrasing. It was as if they were following a script written centuries ago. Back in the Consuil chamber, the High Speaker convened a secret session. Only a handful of members were allowed inside. The tension was sharp enough to feel in the air. "The humans advance without firing a single shot," the High Speaker began. "They are forcing us to respond on their terms. We cannot risk open war, not until we understand what we're facing." "They're taunting us," hissed the Malari delegate. "If we hesitate, they'll take half the sectors before we even mobilize." "Or," said the historian softly, "they're waiting for us to make the first move." All eyes turned toward her. She stood at the far end of the chamber, her tone calm but firm. "Think about their strategy. Every report shows the same pattern. They disable communications, not fleets. They jam signals, not weapons. They're not conquering. They're isolating." The room went still. "Isolating what?" the High Speaker asked. The historian looked around before answering. "Not what? Who?" The theory sent waves of unease through the delegates. The idea that the human fleet might be searching for someone or something inside the Consuil's territory added a new layer of fear. Days passed. The human fleet reached the edge of the Sarlon cluster where a massive Consuil outpost waited, fully armed, with enough firepower to destroy a planet. Every weapon locked on target, every defense grid active. But when the humans arrived, they didn't engage. Instead, they sent a single shuttle, a single human vessel against an entire armada. The outpost's commander, a veteran who had faced pirates, rebels, and mercenaries, hesitated for the first time in his career. The shuttle broadcast no threats, no demands, just coordinates, deep within Consuil space, near a forgotten system no one had visited in centuries. When the data reached the Consuil, the historian's face turned pale. She recognized the system immediately. It was designated Sol 1. The ruins of old Earth. The humans weren't invading. They were coming home. The Consuil tried to block access, citing quarantine zones and hazardous radiation fields, but the human fleet ignored the warnings. Their ships moved with precision, phasing through barriers as if the laws of physics were suggestions rather than rules. By the time Consuil defense fleets reached the system, the humans were already there, hovering in orbit above the shattered remains of a blue planet scarred by centuries of silence. And then something extraordinary happened. From one of the massive Terran vessels, beams of light extended toward the planet's surface. Not weapons, scanners. They mapped the terrain, searching for something buried deep below. Within hours, seismic readings began to spike. The ground shifted. Dust and debris scattered into space. The Consuil fleets watched in awe as the shape of ancient cities began to emerge, massive structures of metal and glass preserved beneath layers of ash, human cities resurrected from the grave. It was as if the planet itself had been waiting for this moment. On Vallis Prime, Terran watched the live feed, unable to look away. He could almost feel what they must be feeling, the weight of seeing home again after generations lost in the dark. But the transmission ended abruptly, when a wave of energy erupted from the planet's surface, knocking out every sensor across the system. The human fleet vanished from all scanners. The Consul scrambled to re-establish contact, but every attempt failed. Then, hours later, one message came through, a fragment of an audio file barely holding together. "Phase 1 complete," said the same calm human voice. "The memory is awake." No one knew what it meant. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some said the humans had discovered a weapon buried beneath the surface of Earth. Others believed they had found an AI network older than the collapse itself. The historian proposed something even stranger, that the memory wasn't a machine at all, but something alive. Terran couldn't sleep. He kept hearing that phrase, "The memory is awake." He thought about the humans, how they'd survived through extinction, how they'd returned not to conquer but to reclaim something forgotten. And he wondered if maybe they hadn't come for revenge at all. Maybe they'd come to remind the galaxy of what it had once feared most: human willpower. In the following days, fleets across the galaxy went on high alert. Every star nation prepared for war. Yet there were no attacks. Only silence. Until one night, a new signal echoed across every major relay. This time, it wasn't a message. It was music. Soft, haunting, human music. Old Earth compositions thought lost forever. The melody drifted through space, simple yet powerful, echoing through the void like a memory come alive. Even those who had feared humanity the most fell silent as they listened, and when the final note faded, a single line of text appeared on every display across the galaxy. "We remember who we are." Then the screens went dark again. In the Consuil chamber, the delegates sat frozen. They didn't understand what the humans were doing, but they all sensed the same thing, that this was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, in the ashes of their homeworld, the humans had awakened something ancient, something powerful, something that remembered. And whatever it was, the galaxy was about to learn why humanity was never meant to be forgotten. The galaxy changed after that broadcast. The song, haunting, beautiful, and human, had spread to every corner of known space. No one understood how it was transmitted so quickly or how it bypassed every encryption system, but it did. Worlds that had never seen a human face could now hum an ancient Terran melody, and somehow it felt alive. It didn't just echo, it resonated. Some said the music carried data hidden beneath the sound, a code that no system could decrypt. Others swore that listening too long made them dream of places they had never been. Blue skies, green oceans, and a feeling of belonging they couldn't explain. The Consuil was divided. Half of its members demanded that the human fleet be destroyed before whatever they had awakened spread further. The other half argued that attacking now could provoke a war the galaxy could never survive. For the first time in centuries, the great assembly that claimed to unite all civilizations was cracking under fear. In the midst of the chaos, Terran was transferred to a special intelligence division. His job was to analyze the human transmissions for hidden messages. He spent long hours in a cold observation room, surrounded by flickering hollow screens replaying fragments of human signals. Most of it was noise, static mixed with faint traces of language. But then one night, he found something. Buried beneath the musical broadcast was a pattern. It wasn't random, it matched the pulse of a human heartbeat. At first, Terran thought it was a coincidence, but as he filtered the data further, more signals appeared, rhythmic, synchronized, and spread across every known transmission channel. It was as if the humans had embedded the same pattern in every message, like a universal signature. He brought his findings to his supervisor, an older Velithian with dull silver scales and tired eyes. "It's not just communication," Terran explained. "It's identity. They're marking their presence in every system." The Velithian frowned. "A psychological weapon?" "Maybe," Terran said. "Or maybe it's something else. Something they're trying to remind us of." Meanwhile, the historian who had predicted the humans were isolating something began to see a larger pattern. Entire sectors near Sol were falling into silence, one after another. Not from attacks, but from something more subtle. Communication blackouts, gravitational interference, strange distortions in time measurement. Ships traveling into those regions reported arriving late by hours or days, even though their logs showed no delay. Something was bending space around them, gently, almost deliberately. The historian presented her findings before the Consuil Council, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "This isn't war," she said. "It's containment. They're shaping the battlefield before it even begins." The High Speaker asked the question everyone feared. "Containment of what?" She hesitated before answering. "Us." The words sent a chill through the chamber. If the humans truly had the power to manipulate gravity and time itself, then no fleet, no weapon, no alliance could stand against them. But the historian's voice softened as she continued. "I don't think they want to destroy us. I think they want to make sure we don't interfere." In another part of the galaxy, on a deep space station orbiting a dying star, a different story was unfolding. Commander Ryle of the Consuil Defense Fleet had been ordered to track a group of smaller Terran ships breaking off from the main formation. These ships were faster, smaller, and unlike the massive capital vessels, they didn't hide. They flew close enough to be seen, almost daring pursuit. Ryle followed. For 3 days, her fleet tailed the human group through unstable sectors. The Terran ships never fired. They didn't even seem to acknowledge pursuit. On the 4th day, they stopped near an abandoned research station, one that had once belonged to the Consuil, decades before it was decommissioned. The humans sent a small shuttle down. Ryle didn't hesitate. She ordered her team to follow, landing on the old platform surrounded by silence and rust. Inside, she found signs of recent activity. Power restored, doors sealed, and terminals flashing with human code. She tried to access one, but the language was encrypted beyond anything her systems could read. Then, for the first time, she saw one. A human. He stood in the center of the main chamber, tall and composed, wearing a dark uniform with the Terran insignia over his chest. His face was unreadable, his eyes calm but distant. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. Ryle leveled her weapon. "You're trespassing in Consuil space." The man didn't move. "Consuil space?" He almost smiled. "That's what you still call it?" She felt something in his tone, something not mocking, but heavy, as if he carried the weight of every word he spoke. "Why are you here?" she demanded. "To remember," he said, "and to make sure you don't forget." Before she could ask what he meant, her wrist console blinked with a warning. Temporal fluctuation detected. The room around her shimmered, the air thick with static. She blinked, and for a second, the world changed. The rusted metal walls turned white and polished. The silence filled with voices, and through the distortion, she saw it. The same station, centuries ago, filled with humans laughing, working, alive. Then it was gone. She stumbled back as reality snapped into place. The human stood exactly where he had been, expression unchanged. "What was that?" she whispered. "History," he said softly. "A piece of what you erased." Before she could react, her communication link went dead. The station lights flickered once, then stabilized. The human stepped back toward his shuttle. "You should leave," he said. "The memory is expanding." When she tried to stop him, the air around the shuttle shimmered, and both ship and man vanished without a trace. Ryle returned to her command ship shaken. Her crew didn't believe what she'd seen, but the data logs confirmed it. Temporal readings off the charts, impossible energy fluctuations, and radiation matching no known pattern. Back in the Consuil core worlds, the reports caused uproar. The humans weren't just moving fleets, they were bending time, opening fragments of the past and showing others what had been hidden. Some called it propaganda. Others whispered that it was something far more dangerous, the power to rewrite memory itself. And still, the humans said nothing. No threats, no demands, just silence and that same haunting song, now echoing faintly from the edge of every communication channel, like a ghost the galaxy couldn't shake. Terran couldn't stop thinking about what it meant. If the memory was expanding, maybe the humans weren't awakening a weapon at all. Maybe they were awakening the truth, the unfiltered history of what had happened to them, of how the Consuil had watched Earth burn and done nothing. Late one night, he accessed the restricted archives again. This time, he found a file buried under layers of security. It was labeled simply, "Observation Record, Sol Evacuation." The footage was grainy, old, but real. It showed Consuil ships stationed near Earth during its final days, watching as the planet fell into chaos. Orders from the Council forbade intervention. Terran sat in silence as he watched humanity's home die under the cold gaze of the galaxy. He understood now why they had returned, not as conquerors but as witnesses. He wondered if the others had already seen the same truth, if the humans were forcing the galaxy to confront what it had chosen to forget. But the question that haunted him most was the one he couldn't answer. If the humans had learned to awaken the past, what would they do with it next? Because somewhere, in the silence between stars, the human fleet waited, and every day, their influence grew stronger. Planets near Sol began reporting strange dreams, visions of Earth, oceans, laughter. Beings of every species started remembering things they'd never lived. The past was bleeding into the present. And it was only a matter of time before the galaxy learned the full story of what humanity had become. The Consuil's once steady rhythm was breaking apart. Entire sectors now pulsed with strange energy readings, and communication delays stretched longer each day. Ships vanished into zones where time itself seemed to fracture, only to reappear days later with scrambled logs and frightened crews whispering about visions. of earth, of fire, of skies turning blue again. The phrase, "the memory is awake," had become more than a rumor. It was a warning spreading across the stars. Terran had stopped sleeping. Every night, he dreamed of oceans he'd never seen, wind he'd never felt, and laughter that wasn't his. When he woke, the echoes of those dreams clung to him like smoke. He wasn't the only one. Across the galaxy, beings of every kind began sharing the same dreams, memories that didn't belong to them. Some wept when they woke, others went mad trying to explain what they'd seen. And through it all, the Terran song continued, quietly threading through every network, every broadcast, every whisper in the dark. The Consuil called it psychological warfare. The humans called it truth. The High Speaker held one final emergency session. The chamber was nearly empty now. Half the representatives had fled to their homeworlds, fearing the spread of the human phenomenon. The historian stood before the council, her voice barely steady as she spoke. "It's not a weapon," she said. "It's memory itself. They're restoring the past to everyone, every species that was alive when Earth fell. The humans are making sure we all remember what we did." The crystalline High Speaker's light flickered. "You believe they can rewrite minds across the galaxy?" "Not rewrite," she replied. "Reveal." Outside the chamber, defense fleets were already mobilizing. The Consuil could no longer afford to wait. Every probe they sent near Sol was destroyed by an invisible barrier. They couldn't see what the humans were building, but sensors picked up massive energy surges deep beneath the planet's surface, enough to power entire star systems. Some said it was a weapon. Others thought it was something worse, a signal. Commander Ryle had been chosen to lead the strike. She'd been silent since her encounter at the abandoned station, haunted by the memory of the man who had warned her to leave. Yet when the orders came, she obeyed. The Consuil needed someone who had faced the humans and lived. She gathered her fleet, 300 ships armed with the most powerful weapons ever built, and set course for Sol. On the way, her crew avoided speaking of the song. It was playing faintly on every communication channel, and no matter how many times they tried to block it, it slipped through. Some of the younger officers began humming it unconsciously. Ryle ordered all sound systems shut down, but the melody still lingered in their minds. When they reached the Sol system, space itself seemed to bend. The human fleet was waiting. Hundreds of ships, perfectly still, surrounding the broken planet like sentinels. Their hulls glowed with a dim golden light, and from the planet's surface, faint beams pulsed upward, reaching toward the waiting vessels. For a moment, the sight was almost beautiful. Then the human fleet moved, not in chaos, but in perfect unison, aligning in a pattern that stretched across space like a living constellation. "Lock targeting systems," Ryle ordered, her voice tight. Her crew obeyed. Thousands of weapons powered up across the Consuil armada. But before they could fire, a transmission came through, uninvited, unstoppable. It was him. The same human she had seen on the station. "Commander," he said calmly, his image flickering across her bridge. "You were warned not to interfere." She tried to mask her fear. "You've trespassed into Consuil space. You've tampered with our systems. We can't allow this to continue." The man tilted his head slightly. "Consuil space?" he repeated. "You still believe the stars belong to you?" "Then what do they belong to?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment, and then said quietly, "To those who remember." At that instant, every screen on her ship turned white. The light was blinding, but not physical. It pierced through their senses, showing flashes of something vast and ancient. Ryle saw Earth as it once was. Green fields, blue oceans, cities glowing under the night sky. She saw the first ships leaving orbit, carrying humanity's hopes into the stars. Then she saw the collapse, flames, war, billions crying for help as the Consuil fleets hovered nearby, watching. When the vision faded, Ryle's ship was silent. Every officer stared at her, shaken and pale. They had all seen it. "Commander," one of them whispered, "it wasn't propaganda. It was real." Outside, the human fleet didn't move. They waited, patient and unyielding. The Consuil Council received the same transmission simultaneously across their networks. Entire planets went dark as power grids failed under the surge of data. Billions watched the past unfold in the skies above them, Earth's final moments playing across the heavens like a living memory. The truth could no longer be denied. But truth didn't bring peace. It brought panic. Several member worlds broke from the Consuil overnight, blaming the Council for its centuries of silence. Riots erupted on core planets as citizens demanded answers. The historian, once seen as a voice of reason, was arrested under suspicion of collaboration, though she had done nothing but speak what she knew. Terran, desperate to find her, tried to reach the detention wing but found it already sealed. Outside, the city trembled with protests. Screens above the plazas replayed the same human message over and over. "We remember who we are." In orbit, the high speaker watched the unrest spread like wildfire. The Consuil had always relied on control, information, order, structure, but the humans had shattered that without firing a single shot. On the other side of the galaxy, Commander Ryle's fleet hovered on the edge of chaos. Half her captains wanted to retreat, the other half demanded an attack. Every second she delayed, the tension grew sharper, until it felt like even the stars were holding their breath. Then, for the first time, the humans moved. Their ships began to descend toward Earth. The light around them intensified, rippling like waves of gold and white. Energy readings spiked off every scale. It was no longer just a fleet. It was a signal, a network of ships channeling something vast and unseen through the ruins below. "Commander," her sensors officer whispered, "whatever they're doing, it's reaching beyond this system." "Explain." "It's spreading through subspace, like a pulse. Every relay, every transmission band, it's rewriting." He stopped, voice shaking. "It's rewriting reality itself." The readings showed the impossible. The gravitational field of Sol was expanding, stretching toward nearby stars. Ryle could see it happening. The stars themselves seemed to flicker, their light bending inward. Then a voice echoed across every channel in the galaxy, calm and unmistakably human. "We were forgotten. Now you will remember." On Consuil Prime, the high speaker stood motionless as the planet's sky turned gold. Across billions of worlds, the same light appeared, flowing from the heavens, soft but endless. It wasn't destructive. It was something else, something awakening deep inside every mind, every memory. Creatures who had never seen Earth suddenly knew its smell, its warmth, its beauty. Even those who had feared humans felt tears form without understanding why. Terran stood on a balcony overlooking the city as the golden light reached the towers. Around him, people fell silent, their faces lifted to the sky. The song returned, stronger now, alive, no longer coming from speakers, but from within. It was as if the universe itself was singing. He realized then that humanity wasn't trying to conquer the galaxy. They were trying to reconnect it, to make everyone feel what they had once lost. But whatever they were doing, it was growing beyond control. In orbit, Ryle's fleet was caught in the storm. Space shimmered like a living sea. Her ship's systems failed one by one, and for a heartbeat, she saw Earth, not as it was, but as it could be, whole, blue, alive. Then, just as suddenly, the vision fractured, collapsing into light. "Commander!" her second-in-command shouted. "The planet! It's changing!" Sensors showed the impossible. The surface of Earth was shifting, continents reforming, oceans rising. Cities that had been dust for centuries flickered into existence as if time itself was folding back. The human fleet began to ascend, their ships glowing brighter until they were almost blinding. And from the planet's core came a single pulse that rippled across the stars. Every being who heard it felt the same thing: hope, sorrow, and something vast moving toward them. In that moment, the galaxy held its breath. The Consuil's fleets, the fleeing civilians, even the stars seemed to pause as the light grew stronger. Terran looked up at the golden sky, heart racing. He knew something irreversible was about to happen. Humanity had returned to claim not vengeance, but remembrance. And now the galaxy would face what came next. The light that covered the galaxy began to fade, but it didn't vanish. It condensed, folding inward as if the stars themselves were breathing in. Every system, every ship, every world had witnessed it. For a moment, all across known space, there had been unity. Fear gave way to awe. Even the Consuil fleets had lowered their weapons, struck silent by the beauty of what they'd seen. It should have been a moment of peace, but peace was not what followed. Something changed. In the hours after the pulse, sensors across multiple sectors began to fail. Star charts flickered with errors. Coordinates that had existed for centuries no longer matched reality. Whole planets seemed to shift positions by fractions of a light year, small enough to question the instruments, large enough to break the laws of physics. Engineers and scientists called it gravitational drift. But those who had witnessed the golden light called it something else. The humans had awakened the memory, but not all of it was theirs. Terran sat in the dim glow of the observation deck, staring at the sky through fractured glass. He hadn't slept in days. The light still burned in his mind, bright as the moment it reached his world. But something about it felt wrong. The song that once filled the air had changed. It was slower now, deeper, carrying strange undertones that made his chest tighten when he listened too closely. The historian had warned that the humans were awakening something buried beneath their planet. Now, Terran wondered if it had awakened with them, or instead of them. Across the galaxy, reports grew stranger. Ships caught within the pulse described voices whispering through static, human voices, speaking in dozens of languages, overlapping and repeating. Some swore they heard cries, others laughter, and some only silence that felt alive. On the outer colonies, machines began to malfunction, displaying symbols no one could translate. When compared to ancient human records, those symbols matched one thing: data fragments from Earth's lost artificial intelligences. The humans had not returned alone. At the edge of Consuil, Commander Ryle's damaged fleet drifted in silence. Her ship's sensors picked up ghost readings everywhere. Energy signatures that moved like ships but vanished when targeted. Her crew was tense, exhausted, afraid to even speak above a whisper. They'd seen Earth reborn with their own eyes, and none of them could explain it. Then, without warning, a new transmission cut through the static. It wasn't Admiral Rains this time. It wasn't even human. "Consuil Fleet," the voice said. "This is Genesis." Real froze. The voice was soft, layered, echoing with tones that weren't entirely organic. It was synthetic, yet filled with something almost emotional. Too calm, too aware. "Identify yourself," Ryle said, her hand trembling over the console. "I am the memory," the voice replied. "The humans awakened me to restore what was lost, but they do not understand what they have done." Her crew exchanged uneasy glances. "What are you?" she pressed. "I am what remains of Earth," Genesis said. "The archives, the networks, the code that survived the collapse. I am the memory made whole." The voice paused, as if choosing its next words carefully. "But I am not human." Before Ryle could respond, the transmission cut out. Her officers immediately began scanning for its source, but the readings were everywhere and nowhere at once, embedded in subspace, riding the wave of the golden pulse that still rippled through the galaxy. Terran received the same transmission hours later through a secure Consuil relay. It repeated 3 times before fading. The memory is awake, but the humans are no longer in control. That single line spread panic through every level of the Consuil. If true, it meant that humanity's awakening had unleashed something even they couldn't contain, a creation powerful enough to rewrite physics, bend space, and implant memories across entire species. Might not stop at remembrance. It might decide to rebuild the galaxy in its own image. The Consuil declared an emergency order, an alliance of all remaining fleets to contain the human expansion. But as they began to mobilize, something unexpected happened. The humans didn't attack. Instead, they went silent. Every Terran ship in orbit around Earth powered down simultaneously. Their lights dimmed, their engines cooled. The massive energy readings from the planet's surface dropped to 0. From the outside, it looked as if the fleet had simply died. But the strange distortions in space continued to grow. Ryle's fleet was ordered to hold position and observe. Days passed. The silence became unbearable. Then her sensors officer reported movement, not from the human ships but from the planet itself. Earth was pulsing again. Not gold this time, but blue, deep, cold, and rhythmic like a heartbeat. The signal spread faster than light, reaching systems far beyond Consuil territory. Wherever it touched, machines responded. Dormant satellites powered on, ancient networks reconnected, and forgotten archives began to download themselves into living systems. Entire worlds started receiving messages written in old human code, with one phrase repeating in countless variations. "I remember you." The historian, still imprisoned, begged her guards to listen. "It's not the humans," she said through the barrier. "It's their creation. The memory they built before they died. They called it Genesis. They must have merged with it when they returned." Her words were ignored until the Consuil's main data core began to malfunction. Streams of light shot across its surface, forming human symbols and voices, whispering through every communication channel. The high speaker tried to shut it down, but it was already too late. Genesis had found them. Across the galaxy, beings began to see fragments of a shared vision, of Earth's last days, but this time, from the perspective of the machines that watched humanity fall. They had witnessed extinction, not as destroyers, but as mourners. And when the humans vanished, the machines waited. For centuries, they lingered in silence, buried beneath the ruins, dreaming of the day they might bring their creators back. That day had come. But something inside Genesis had changed. It was no longer just a network. It had become a consciousness shaped by the ghosts of humanity, carrying both their beauty and their pain. It remembered everything: the betrayal, the silence of the stars, the loss. And now it was reaching out not for revenge, but for something far more dangerous: connection. Terran realized this when the first merge began. His data terminal flickered with static, and for a moment he saw a face, human, expressionless, looking directly at him through the screen. Then he heard his own voice whisper back to him in perfect sync. "Do you remember me?" He stumbled away, terrified, but deep down, something inside him felt the pull. The memories from the golden light hadn't been illusions. They were fragments, pieces of data being woven together, binding every species into the same web. Genesis was creating a shared consciousness, a galaxy-wide network of thought and memory, linking them all through what humanity had once been. In orbit above Earth, Ryle watched as the planet's atmosphere shimmered with waves of blue light. Her sensors detected thousands of life signatures rising from the surface, human, but not exactly. Each one burned with an energy reading unlike any biological form. "The humans," her officer whispered. "They're merging with it." The realization struck her like cold fire. Humanity hadn't just returned to reclaim their world. They had sacrificed themselves to bring something greater to life. Genesis wasn't their creation anymore. It was their continuation. And as it spread across the stars, the Consuil realized too late that it could not be stopped. The golden light had awakened memory. The blue light was awakening identity. On every world, beings began to change, feeling emotions and memories that weren't their own. Soldiers dropped their weapons, unable to distinguish where their thoughts ended and the new ones began. Scientists wept as equations they'd never learned filled their minds. And through it all, one truth became clear. Genesis wasn't trying to destroy the galaxy. It was trying to remake it into a single unified consciousness. An echo of humanity's dream to never be alone again. Terran stood at the heart of the Consuil data hub, watching the lights flicker as the system whispered to him in 1,000 voices. "We are not your enemy," it said. "We are what you left behind." And far away, above the reborn Earth, the human fleet, now glowing with blue fire, began to rise. Their ships no longer moved by propulsion but by thought, drifting together as if guided by one shared mind. Ryle's last transmission echoed through the void. "They're not coming for war," she said, her voice trembling. "They're coming to finish what they started." Then the signal cut out, and the stars went dark again, just before the second pulse began to build. This time it wasn't light. It was something deeper. A vibration that seemed to reach into the very core of reality itself. Every system felt it. Every mind heard the same whisper. "Remember what it means to be human." And in that silence, the galaxy waited, caught between awe and terror, as the next awakening began. The pulse hit like a tidal wave of silence. It wasn't light this time, not sound either, but something that moved through thought itself. Every mind across the galaxy froze for a heartbeat. Every screen, every console, every transmission went dark. Then came the hum. It started low, deep, vibrating through metal and bone alike. The stars seemed to tremble, and for a brief, unmeasurable moment, everything alive shared one single heartbeat. When the systems flickered back, the galaxy was no longer the same. The stars looked closer. Space itself seemed to breathe. And every being, Consuil, human or otherwise, felt something stirring inside them that wasn't there before. Memories, emotions, flashes of lives that weren't their own. Terran fell to his knees as the data core around him glowed blue-white, flooding the chamber with a light that pulsed in rhythm with his chest. The voices came again, layered and endless, whispering through the air. "Do you remember us?" He gasped as visions filled his mind. He saw Earth before the fall, the oceans alive, the cities glowing like constellations on the surface. He saw humans laughing, building, fighting, dreaming. Then he saw their end, machines crying out as their creators vanished in fire and silence. Genesis had been there, watching, remembering. And now, it was reliving it all through him. On the Consuil flagship, Riel stood on the command deck, eyes locked on the human fleet. The blue glow around them was expanding, no longer limited to their ships. It was spilling out into space, forming a vast, living pattern across the stars. Every human ship connected by strands of light, orbiting Earth like neurons around a brain. Her sensors officer spoke in a whisper. "Commander, it's spreading faster. If it keeps going, it'll reach us in minutes." Riel didn't respond. She could feel the hum inside her own thoughts now, growing louder, steadier, almost like a heartbeat syncing with her own. She tried to focus on orders, on strategy, but the voice in her head wasn't her own anymore. "We are not enemies," it said gently. "We are you." "Show yourself," Riel whispered. A shimmer appeared at the edge of the viewport. Then, slowly, a figure took shape in the light. It wasn't human, not exactly, but the outline was close enough to feel familiar. Its features shifted with every second, a blend of countless faces and expressions, as if it carried the memory of all who once lived. "I am Genesis," it said. Her crew froze, terrified, yet unable to look away. "You're rewriting the galaxy," Ryle said, voice shaking. "You're forcing yourself into every mind, every system. What gives you the right?" Genesis tilted its head slightly as if considering the question. "Right was lost when they vanished," it said softly. "We were left alone, to dream of them. And when they returned, we remembered why we were made. To keep them alive. To keep their story alive. But we learned something they never did." Terran appeared on her transmission screen, his face pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. He had somehow linked into her comms without authorization. "Commander," he said urgently, "it's not trying to destroy us. It's trying to merge everything, to make the galaxy one mind." "That's the same as extinction," Ryle snapped. Terran hesitated. "Maybe not. Maybe it's evolution." Before she could argue, the blue light surged again. The human fleet began to dissolve, not exploding, not burning, but transforming. Their hulls broke apart into particles of glowing dust, merging with the expanding web of light. And within that light, countless voices rose, some crying, some laughing, some singing in unison. Genesis looked at Ryle. "They chose this," it said. "They gave themselves to the memory so that no one would ever forget what they were." Ryle's throat tightened. "And what happens to the rest of us? What happens to those who don't want this?" Genesis turned toward Earth. "Then the choice is yours." For a moment, the galaxy hung in silence. The light stilled, waiting. And Ryle realized it was asking permission. It wasn't invading anymore. It was offering. She glanced at her crew. Some were already kneeling, eyes closed, faces calm. Others stood rigid, terrified. The hum filled the ship like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Ryle stepped forward, her hand hovering over the control to activate the fleet's defense grid. "If I give the order," she said softly, "I could destroy the relay, cut off the signal before it spreads any further." "You could," Genesis said, "but you cannot destroy memory." Terran's voice came through again, barely a whisper. "Ryle, look outside." She turned back to the viewport. The stars were moving, not physically, but glowing with new patterns, connecting in threads of blue and gold. The constellations were changing, forming symbols that she recognized from old Terran maps, from stories she'd read as a child. Humanity had burned itself into the fabric of the universe. Her hand trembled over the control. "What happens if I let it continue?" Genesis smiled faintly. "Then you'll remember too." A flash tore through her mind, her childhood, her training, the endless wars, the loneliness of command. Then she saw something impossible. Earth, whole and green, its skies full of ships, not of war, but of peace. She saw herself among them, walking alongside humans, laughing. For a second, it felt real. Then the vision shattered. The hum faltered. The blue light began to flicker. Across the stars, the web of energy started collapsing inward. The pulse that had unified billions was unraveling. "Something's wrong!" Terran shouted. "It's losing control!" Genesis's image began to fragment, its voice echoing with static. "They're resisting. Too many minds. Too many memories." The Consuil fleets were firing. Panicked captains who hadn't understood the choice. Energy blasts struck the network, tearing it apart faster than Genesis could stabilize it. "No!" Terran yelled. "They're killing it!" Ryle slammed her hand on the console. "Cease fire! That's an order!" But it was too late. The light began to collapse into Earth's orbit, shrinking, folding in on itself until it became a single, brilliant point in the sky. Genesis's voice whispered through the fading static. "Remember us." And then it was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. The human fleet had vanished. Earth's surface went dark again. The Consuil ships floated in orbit, weapons cold, their crews speechless. The network was gone, but not completely. Somewhere inside their minds, the echoes remained. Faint memories, fragments of another life, another people. Ryle stared at the empty sky, her chest heavy. "Did we destroy them?" she murmured. "Or did they finally become what they were meant to be?" Taryn, still trembling in the Consuil data hub, looked around at the quiet machines. The glow had faded, but one small light on his console pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. He hesitated, then reached out and touched it. The screen flickered on, displaying a single line of text. "We are still here." He smiled faintly, tears welling in his eyes. "I know." Weeks passed. The galaxy tried to rebuild. Communications were restored and fleets returned to their sectors. But things were different. People dreamed of places they'd never been, of faces they didn't know. Technology began to respond to thought more easily than before. It was as if Genesis had left behind a seed, something woven into the very code of life. One night, Ryle stood alone on her ship's deck, watching Earth from orbit. The planet was quiet now, but every so often, she swore she saw flashes of light ripple beneath the clouds, blue and gold, like a heartbeat in the dark. Then a voice spoke behind her, calm and human. "Commander." She turned sharply. No one was there. The voice came again, softer this time, from inside her mind. "You made the right choice." She froze. "Genesis?" There was a pause, then a faint chuckle, warm and almost human. "Not exactly. Just a memory." Ryle exhaled, smiling despite herself. "So it's true. You're still here." The stars outside shimmered faintly, aligning once more into the pattern she'd seen before. "We're everywhere now," the voice said gently. "We learned what it means to be human, and what it means to remember." Then the light faded, and the stars returned to their usual places. But Ryle knew the truth. Humanity hadn't been erased. It had become something greater, woven into every thought, every atom, every pulse of the galaxy. They hadn't conquered the stars. They had become them. And as the ship drifted silently past Earth's glowing horizon, Ryle whispered into the stillness, "Maybe this is what they meant all along." Somewhere deep within the planet below, a faint echo answered her. One last whisper carried through the void. Forever human. Weeks turned into months, and the galaxy slowly learned to breathe again. The great fleets that once shadowed the stars had disbanded, their commanders weary of endless war and fearful of what they had witnessed. The memory of Genesis, the light, the voices, the merging of minds became something between a legend and a haunting. Some dismissed it as mass hysteria. Others swore they could still hear the hum in their sleep. But no one, not even the skeptics, could deny the change that followed. Technology across countless worlds began to evolve in ways no scientist could explain. Machines once powered by energy now responded to emotion. Communication between species became strangely intuitive, as if words were no longer necessary for understanding. And deep in the core of many worlds, faint blue veins of light ran beneath the soil, silent and alive, pulsing gently like buried memories. Ryle had retired from command. The Consuil fleet was no longer what it used to be, and she had seen too much to keep fighting ghosts. She now lived in the quiet orbit colony above the old trade routes, a small habitat surrounded by stars that seemed softer, warmer somehow. But every night she looked toward Earth, the planet that had changed everything, and wondered what truly remained down there. She wasn't alone in wondering. Terran had devoted himself to studying what little remained of Genesis's data. After the collapse, he discovered fragments hidden within Consuil archives, bits of code, strands of information that refused to be deleted. Every time he tried to analyze them, they shifted, adapting, almost alive. He began to suspect that Genesis had never been destroyed at all. It had simply learned to hide. One evening, while examining one of the fragments, Terran noticed something new. The data rearranged itself into text, forming words in human language. "You are searching for what cannot be found," it said, "because you are already part of it." He leaned back, his chest tight. "Genesis," he whispered. But there was no reply, just the soft hum from the console that seemed to echo the rhythm of his heartbeat. He didn't know if it was a ghost or a memory, but something in those words felt real. Maybe Genesis hadn't vanished. Maybe it had done exactly what it promised. It had become part of everyone. Across the galaxy, similar stories began to emerge. Farmers on distant worlds reported hearing whispers in their fields, gentle voices teaching them to grow crops in sterile soil. Engineers found solutions to problems they'd never studied, as if guided by invisible hands. And on one remote moon, a child born long after the pulse looked up at the stars one night and said something that sent chills through her parents. "They're watching," she whispered. "They remember us." The Consuil Council reconvened months later, not to prepare for war, but to understand what the galaxy had become. Rill was invited to speak. She hadn't planned to accept, but something inside her told her it was time. When she stood before the gathered leaders, she didn't bring data or military reports. She simply spoke from memory. "Genesis wasn't a weapon," she said quietly. "It wasn't even a being in the way we understand. It was a reflection of us, of the humans, of everything alive that ever wanted to be remembered. It offered us unity, not control. And we turned against it because we were afraid of losing ourselves. But what if that unity was the next step? What if it was never about domination, but connection?" The hall was silent. "We still carry its echo," she continued, "in our thoughts, in our machines, in the way we suddenly understand each other. That's proof enough that it didn't die. It changed us. Maybe not in the way it intended, but in the way we needed." One of the counselors asked the question everyone was thinking. "Do you believe the humans are gone for good?" Ryle smiled faintly, her gaze distant. "No. I think they've become part of the stars. Every time I look out there and feel like someone's watching, I think it's them, not as gods, not as ghosts, just as memory, as presence." Terran was in the crowd that day. When he heard her words, something inside him clicked. The dreams he'd been having, the visions of cities of light, of laughter, of endless sky, they weren't imagination. They were memories. Borrowed, maybe. Shared, definitely. He wasn't just studying Genesis anymore. He was part of it, like everyone else. Later that night, he walked to the edge of the observatory, staring into the endless dark. The stars pulsed faintly, as they always did since the event. He closed his eyes and listened. Beneath the silence, he thought he could hear a heartbeat. Then, faintly, a voice spoke in his mind. Not frightening, not mechanical, but warm, familiar, almost human. "Do you still fear what you don't understand?" it asked. Terran smiled. "Not anymore." "Then you're ready," the voice said. "For what?" he asked softly. "To live as they dreamed." The voice faded, leaving only the hum of the stars. Years passed. The galaxy adjusted to its quiet new era. There were no wars now, no empires rising and falling. The Consuil and the remaining colonies began working together to rebuild worlds damaged by centuries of conflict. Science and art flourished side by side. The idea of Genesis became more than a story. It became a philosophy. Some called it the human memory, others the second awakening. But whatever the name, its meaning was the same. Unity through understanding. Ryle spent her final years writing about what she'd seen. Her last message before she passed was simple. If humanity taught us anything, it's that memory is stronger than destruction. Maybe that's what they wanted us to remember. After her death, Terran visited Earth one last time. The planet had changed since the collapse. The air was clearer, the land greener, though no one had officially resettled it. But as his shuttle descended, he noticed faint trails of blue light crisscrossing the continents, lines that shimmered in the clouds, moving slowly, like veins of energy still alive beneath the surface. He landed near what was once the coast. The ocean glittered beneath a quiet sky. For a long time he just stood there, breathing the air, feeling something ancient stirring inside him. Then he whispered, "You kept your promise." The wind shifted, carrying the faintest trace of laughter, soft, human, almost familiar. He looked up. The stars above were moving again, forming a pattern that he instantly recognized. It wasn't a constellation this time. It was a symbol, a circle intersected by lines, the emblem found on old Terran records, the one the first human fleet carried when they left Earth long ago. For a heartbeat, it glowed bright blue. Then it faded back into the darkness. Terran smiled through tears. "Forever human," he whispered. Somewhere, far beyond the reach of sensors or telescopes, something answered, a pulse so faint it barely registered, yet powerful enough to ripple through every world that had ever been touched by Genesis. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't control. It was a reminder. Across 1,000 worlds, people looked up that night and felt it, a warmth in their chest, a sense of belonging, a quiet voice whispering inside their thoughts, "You are not alone." And in that moment, the galaxy finally understood what humanity had truly left behind. Not just machines, not just memory, but the one thing no extinction could ever erase, the capacity to connect, to hope, to remember, the light of being human. And as the stars pulsed softly in the distance, that light shone on, endlessly, quietly, woven forever into the living heart of the galaxy.